Hello, dear YouTube viewers. I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. The evening begins with the husband narrating his own thoughts as he walks into his wife's parents' home, a place that has never truly felt welcoming. The dinner table is set neatly, the smell of food heavy in the air, but beneath the surface lies an unspoken tension. He sits across from his in-laws, his wife by his side, and though the meal starts with small talk about work and everyday life, it doesn't take long before the conversation turns sour. Her father slips in little comments about how Mike, the man she once loved, would have handled things better. Mike was always so good with fixing things around the house, he says, smiling faintly, but his eyes hold a sharp edge. Every word feels like a deliberate reminder. Her mother follows with soft sighs of disappointment whenever he tries to join the conversation, her expressions saying more than words. Each sigh cuts deeper than any insult. The husband feels the weight of the room pressing on him. He glances at his wife, hoping for some defense, but she only lowers her gaze to her plate, avoiding the moment. Her silence is louder than her parents' remarks. Inside his mind, a storm brews. Do they see me as nothing but a mistake? Am I forever going to be compared to a man who isn't even here anymore? He tries to stay calm, swallowing his pride, but the cracks begin to show. Finally, the father-in-law delivers the blow, without disguise. You'll never be better than Mike. He was the kind of man every parent dreams their daughter would marry. The words hang in the air, sharp and final. The husband feels his dignity collapse, as though the very foundation of his marriage is being stripped away in front of him. He turns to his wife, desperate for her support, for her to speak, for her to prove that she chose him for love and not as a consolation prize. But her eyes dart away, unable to meet his. The silence from her is heavier than the insult itself. Something inside him shifts. Instead of shouting or defending himself, a calm steel rises within. He takes a slow breath, lets the hurt settle, and then speaks with quiet defiance. Then go live with him instead. His voice is not raised, but the sharpness of his words slices through the room, like glass shattering. The table falls into absolute silence. The clinking of cutlery stops. Even the air feels heavier. His wife's face turns pale, her lips parting as though to say something, but nothing comes. Her parents freeze in shock, eyes wide, fury beginning to spark in their expressions. He pushes back his chair, the scrape of wood against the floor loud in the tense room. Without another word, he stands and walks away from the table, every step heavy with humiliation, anger, and heartbreak. Inside, his emotions clash, rage at their disrespect, sorrow at his wife's silence, and the ache of feeling like he has never truly belonged in their world. As he leaves the house, the echo of his words lingers in the air, impossible to take back, a line that has finally been drawn. He remembers the first time he met her, long before the bitter dinners, before the heavy silence that would come to define their nights. She was sitting alone in a small cafe, the kind of place tucked away from the noise of the city. Her eyes looked tired, not from lack of sleep, but from carrying a wound that hadn't yet healed. He didn't know all the details then, but he sensed it. Her heart was bruised, her past still clinging to her like an unshakable shadow. When they spoke, she laughed softly, though the sadness beneath it was impossible to miss. She mentioned Mike once, almost in passing, as though the name itself was an unwanted guest. He thought he could be the one to bring her peace, to remind her what it felt like to be chosen, to be cherished without conditions. Their love story grew from there, fragile at first, but filled with genuine moments, late-night walks, promises whispered under the stars, her leaning on him when the memories of Mike seemed too heavy. For a while, he believed her heart had fully turned toward him. But even then, there were signs, old photographs tucked in drawers, little comments about what used to be, comparisons that seemed innocent on the surface but left scars on his pride. As the marriage settled into routine, the shadow of Mike never truly disappeared. It wasn't just in her heart, it was in the walls around them, in her family's words, in the air he breathed whenever they gathered. Her parents would slip Mike's name into conversation as though it were the standard against which all men should be measured. Mike's business is flourishing, her father would say casually, or Mike always had a way with people, her mother would add, her eyes glimmering with nostalgia. Each mention was a reminder that he was fighting a ghost, someone absent yet constantly present. He would force a smile, laugh lightly, act as though it didn't matter. But inside, it cut deeply. Every word felt like a dagger that twisted further each time he pretended not to feel it. Even in moments of intimacy with his wife, he wondered if she compared him silently, if she measured his worth against the man who had come before. He carried his love like a shield, convincing himself that loyalty, effort, and time would erase the comparisons. He worked tirelessly, not just at his job, but at the marriage itself, showing up for her in ways he believed Mike never had. He cooked when she was tired, listened when she needed silence, held her when she broke down without explanation. His loyalty was unwavering, his love relentless. Yet no matter how much he gave, there was always a voice in the back of his mind whispering doubts. Was he truly the man she wanted, or just the man who arrived when the one she loved had gone? The thought haunted him more than he cared to admit. Sometimes, when she looked at him with soft eyes, he felt certain she loved him, that he was enough. But other times, in the quiet moments when she drifted off in thought, he couldn't help but wonder where her mind had gone. Did she drift back to memories of Mike? Did she imagine what life would have been like if he had stayed? These questions gnawed at him, leaving wounds invisible to everyone else but very real to him. He began to question everything: his worth, his place in her life, even the foundation of their marriage. Did she marry me because she loved me, or because Mike left her, and I was the safer choice? The possibility that he was never truly her first choice burned like acid in his chest. It wasn't just jealousy. It was humiliation, a deep sense of being tolerated rather than desired. And yet he stayed. He stayed because he loved her more than he loved his pride, even as that pride eroded piece by piece under the shadow of a man who no longer even stood beside her. When they got home, the air between them was thick, heavy with words unsaid, and wounds still fresh from the dinner table. The moment the door closed, her voice rose. "How could you embarrass me like that?" Her face was flushed, eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and fear. She wasn't just angry at what he had said. She was terrified of how it had shattered the fragile balance she had kept between her family and her marriage. He stood in the living room, still holding onto the weight of her parents' words. His voice came back sharp, cutting through her accusations. "How could you let them humiliate me? How could you just sit there, silent, while they tore me apart?" The argument exploded like fire catching drywood. Years of silence, of swallowed frustrations, came spilling out in angry words neither could take back. She accused him of overreacting, of letting pride blind him. He accused her of never defending him, of allowing her parents' ghosts to dictate the rhythm of their marriage. His voice cracked with raw pain as he shouted, "Do you even realize what it feels like to always be compared to another man in your own marriage?" She flinched, but fired back. "They just want the best for me. Can't you see that?" Her words stung worse than the insults at dinner. They weren't just defending her parents. They were justifying them. He stared at her, stunned, his chest tightening as though she had struck him. "No," he said slowly, his tone lower now, but heavy with truth. "They don't want the best for you. They want Mike for you, not me. They've never wanted me." Her lips trembled, but she had no answer. The silence that followed was worse than the shouting. She turned away, tears welling, and without another word, she walked to the guest room and shut the door. The click of the lock echoed through the house like a verdict. That night stretched endlessly. He lay awake in the master bedroom, the emptiness beside him colder than winter. He replayed the dinner in his mind, the years before it, every insult, and every sigh that had made him feel smaller. He thought of all the times he had bitten his tongue to keep peace, all the times he had smiled when he wanted to scream. His eyes drifted toward the wedding photo on the nightstand. They both looked so happy in that picture, her smile radiant, his eyes full of hope. But now, staring at it in the dark, he wondered if it had been an illusion. Was that happiness real? Or was I just filling a space Mike left behind? He pressed his palms to his face, fighting the ache inside. The silence of the house gnawed at him, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards, as though even the walls whispered reminders of how alone he truly felt. The next morning, just as he was pouring himself a cup of coffee, a knock came at the door. It was firm, impatient, the kind of knock that carried authority. He opened it to find his father-in-law standing there, arms crossed, jaw set tight. Without waiting for an invitation, the older man stepped inside. The tension was immediate, the kind that made the air thick and hard to breathe. The father-in-law wasted no time. His voice was sharp, brimming with disdain. "You think you're a man? You'll never measure up to Mike. He was more of a man than you'll ever be." The words struck deep, but this time something inside the husband snapped, not into rage, but into clarity. He stood straighter, his voice calm yet firm, steady in a way that silenced the room. Then why didn't he marry her? Why am I the one still here, standing beside her after all this time? If he was so perfect, why is it me she chose, not him? The older man's face darkened. For the first time, the certainty in his eyes faltered. He opened his mouth as though to reply, but no words came. The truth hung between them, undeniable, heavier than all the insults he had thrown. With a scowl, he turned on his heel and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The husband stood there, breathing deeply, his heart racing but steady. For once, he didn't feel small. He didn't feel overshadowed. He felt something else, something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like a man reclaiming his dignity. It happened when he least expected it. He had ducked into a cafe one afternoon, hoping for a quiet moment to gather his thoughts. The past few days had been heavy, filled with silence at home and the echo of his father-in-law's cruel words. He ordered a coffee and turned toward an empty table, but then he froze. Sitting by the window, casually scrolling through his phone, was the man whose name had haunted his marriage from the very beginning, Mike. For a moment, he almost walked away. His chest tightened. His palms itched with nervous energy. Here was the ghost, made flesh. But something inside him urged him forward. He approached slowly, and when Mike looked up, recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by a polite smile. They exchanged greetings, awkward at first, but then the conversation found its rhythm. Mike looked just as the stories described. Well-dressed, confident, carrying himself with an ease that seemed effortless. He had the polished charm of someone used to being admired. Sitting across from him, the husband felt every insecurity rise to the surface. For years, he had imagined this man as flawless, the benchmark he could never reach. Yet, as they talked, the image began to crack. Mike leaned back, sipping his drink, and smirked. "So, her parents still talk about me?" he asked casually, as though it were nothing more than gossip. "That's pathetic. I left because I couldn't deal with them. Too controlling, too demanding. They never stopped trying to shape our relationship into what they wanted it to be. Eventually, I realized I couldn't breathe around them." The husband blinked, stunned. For years, he had been told Mike was perfect, the ideal man who had slipped through their fingers. Yet here was Mike himself, admitting he had walked away because he couldn't endure the same people who now tortured him. The revelation hit like a shockwave. He had been competing with an illusion, a version of Mike polished by nostalgia and parental longing. The man before him wasn't some godlike rival, just another man who had chosen freedom over chains. As the conversation went on, Mike's flaws showed themselves. He spoke with a touch of arrogance, a hint of bitterness toward commitments, and a detachment that made it clear he hadn't been ready for the kind of love and responsibility marriage demanded. The husband realized something important in that moment. Mike hadn't been driven away by weakness. He had simply chosen himself over the weight of expectation. And maybe that was why her parents clung to his memory. They could mold his absence into perfection, while his presence had been far from it. When they parted ways, the husband stepped back into the street with a strange calm settling over him. The ghost he had battled for years had turned out to be nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Mike wasn't the threat. The real enemy had always been the lack of respect that surrounded him. He whispered to himself, "It's not about Mike. It was never about him. It's about respect." That evening, as he sat alone in the living room, he let the truth sink in. He had fought tirelessly, not to prove himself better than Mike, but to prove himself worthy in a place where he had never been respected. No amount of loyalty, no depth of love could survive in the shadow of a man constantly raised on a pedestal by others. He realized he could no longer accept being second in his own marriage. His heart ached at the thought of leaving her. He still loved her, despite everything. But he loved himself too, and that love had been neglected for too long. He looked around the house, the pictures on the walls, the memories built with her, and felt the weight of what he was about to do. This was not just about walking away from her parents, or even from Mike's ghost. This was about choosing his dignity over a love that kept him chained to humiliation. He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, and prepared himself. The hardest choice lay before him, his marriage or his self-respect. And this time, he knew he couldn't have both. The house was quiet when he finally asked her to sit down. She looked at him warily, eyes already swollen from sleepless nights, the distance between them heavier than ever. He sat across from her, his hands clasped, voice steady but carrying the weight of everything he had carried in silence. "I loved you with everything I had," he began, each word deliberate, raw. "But your silence, your parents' words, they killed me piece by piece. Every time they compared me to Mike, every time you said nothing, it tore something inside me. I can't live like this anymore." She opened her mouth, but he raised a hand, not in anger, but in finality. "I'm not asking for perfection. I'm not asking to be worshipped. I just wanted respect. But if you still live in Mike's shadow, then stay there. I won't fight for space in your past." His voice wavered at the end, not from weakness, but from the exhaustion of carrying pain too long. Her face crumbled, and the tears came fast. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I never wanted to hurt you," she cried. "I was scared that if I went against them, I'd lose my parents' love. So I stayed quiet. I thought silence would keep peace, but I see now it broke you." His heart twisted at the sight of her breaking, but he knew it was too late. He leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. "And in that silence, you lost me." The truth hung between them, sharper than any fight they had ever had. She reached out, but he pulled back, not in anger, but with the quiet certainty of a man who had nothing left to give. Slowly, he rose from his chair and walked into the bedroom. He pulled a suitcase from the closet, his hands moving steadily as he folded clothes, placed them neatly inside, and zipped it shut. She followed him to the doorway, clutching the frame as if it could hold her together. Her sobs filled the room, but he didn't stop. When he lifted the suitcase and carried it toward the door, she whispered through her tears, "Please don't go." But her voice no longer had the power to hold him. He paused only once, glancing back at her, with eyes filled not with anger, but with sorrow and finality. Then he opened the door and stepped outside, leaving the life they had built together behind him. The night air hit him like a wave of cold freedom. He walked down the street, suitcase rolling beside him, his chest aching but strangely lighter. Narration echoed in his mind. Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go when respect is gone. He looked up at the sky, the stars faint but present, like distant witnesses to his pain. His heart still bled, but beneath the wound was something he hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. He thought of her parents, of Mike, of all the years he had spent fighting shadows. And then he thought of himself, the man who had endured, the man who had finally chosen self-respect over humiliation. His steps slowed, and he whispered into the night, "I may not be better than Mike in their eyes, but at least I'm enough for myself." And with that, he kept walking, scarred but free. The curtain closed on his story, not with triumph, not with revenge, but with the bittersweet hope of a man who had finally chosen himself. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe. Our channel, Awesome Visual Story.